You're investing. You're making regular monthly contributions, you have a diversified portfolio, automatic rebalancing. You're doing everything right. And then the market drops 30% and you sit there watching the numbers melt away. That strange feeling in your stomach, this incredibly strong feeling that all this work was a mistake. Maybe you should have kept it all in cash. Maybe timing would have been smarter. Maybe that gold ad was actually right. And this is exactly where most people destroy decades of potential wealth. Not in the market drop itself. In their reaction to the market drop. I've been watching this for years. People turning into those who sell assets because they don't want to be seen as ignorant and cowardly by their circle. People who feel stupid for just holding some stocks. People selling what would have been perfect investments if they hadn't panicked. I'm Wyatt and I spend way too much time exposing these habits that ruin your financial future. If market drops scare you or if you don't know what to do when your investment portfolio loses value, follow the channel and don't forget to like if this helps. Let's start with how market psychology actually works because most people think they understand why their investments feel so emotional, but something much deeper is at play. There's a concept called loss aversion that forms the foundation of investment psychology research. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman's work shows that the pain of losing is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. This isn't abstract. It's a measurable reality with real neurodischarges in your brain. What does this mean? Losing $10,000 in your portfolio feels twice as bad as gaining $10,000. This explains why investments feel emotional by nature. Mathematically, having an investment worth less than when you started feels twice as bad as the pleasure of gaining $10,000. And this feeling is completely real, but it's also exactly the feeling that will lead you to make financial mistakes. Your brain is wired to avoid things that cause pain. This makes sense for short-term survival but leads to disaster for long-term wealth building. This means you shouldn't call yourself stupid or weak if you feel the urge to sell when your investment portfolio loses value. This feeling is what everyone feels. The difference is whether strong investors give in to this feeling. To understand why these instincts are so powerful, we need to look at the evolutionary background. As ancient humans, our ancestors had to avoid loss as a literal life or death matter. Losing food threatened our survival. Losing status could get us kicked out of the group. Investment portfolio loss naturally triggers this ancient threat response. The brain processes it biologically as a threat. The most interesting part is this: in financial markets, this threat response does the exact opposite. Avoiding a real threat helps you survive. Reacting this way to a market drop harms real wealth accumulation. Your evolutionary programming directly conflicts with making good financial decisions, and recognizing this changes things even if you can't fully fix it. Now let's talk about 9 things people say about market psychology and what each one really means. First, I want to panic sell during market drops. This is the most expensive trap in investment psychology. Research from J.P. Morgan showed that from 2003 to 2022 the S&P 500 returned 9.8% annually. But the average investor who missed just the 10 best days of that period got only 5.6% annually. Just 10 best days in 20 years. That almost halves the return by missing 4 days. And do you know when those best days came? Typically right after big drops, when fear was at its peak. This means people who follow their feelings and sell during drops don't just hold the low prices. They completely miss the recovery. The market's highest gain days often coincide with the times when panic selling feels most tempting. Second, I think I can trade based on market signals. This is one of the most consistently documented fallacies in academic finance. Market timing is something that more than 90% of professional fund managers fail at over the long term. They lose to a simple index fund portfolio, professionals who do this full-time, with teams of analysts and algorithmic trading tools. Then you and I, with full-time jobs, families, and normal lives, try to get the timing right. You're trying to compete with a machine that works for AM every morning, programmed by the smartest mathematicians on the planet, with instant access to billions of dollars of financial data. The importance is not in timing the market but in spending time in the market. It sounds like a cliché, but it's backed by decades of research with a 90% failure rate. Third, I suffered a big loss and I need to make it back. This is something called the break-even effect, a particularly dangerous feeling that pushes people into irrational risk after a big loss. After suffering a big loss, people are more likely to try to make it back quickly with high-risk bets. But what actually happens is this: if they suffered the initial loss, it was usually from taking excessive risk, trying to time the market, or picking specific stocks. Continuing the same behavior will likely cause even more damage. The break-even effect leads to a second loss that's bigger than the first. After a big financial loss, the best thing to do is often to deliberately be boring, return to your investment strategy, keep contributing, and avoid high-risk compensatory gambling. Fourth, I saw other people make a lot of money in the short term and I think it could work for me too. This is FOMO-driven investing, or, more technically, social reference point-based financial decision-making. When people receive information about other people's financial gains, it naturally changes their standards of what's possible, usually comparing themselves to quite selective, cherry-picked success stories. The critical thing to understand here is this: you hear stories about big short-term gains because those are the attention-grabbing ones. You hear less about big short-term losses because people find them embarrassing. This is definitely a sampling bias issue. For every great short-term gain, there are many people experiencing the exact opposite, and no one knows who they are because no one announces their losses. If you're really evaluating short-term investment strategies, you want to look at all outcomes, not just the attention-grabbing success stories. Fifth, the current market feels too expensive, I don't think it makes sense to invest now. This is a classic expression of something called valuation anxiety, the often unintentional bias that tells people to stay away from investing. The documented reality is this: historically, most periods when people thought the market felt expensive were still good times to invest, because markets continue to grow over long time frames. People who always think there will be a better time to invest are actually unintentionally trying to time the market. And they do it without even realizing it because valuation anxiety feels smart and prudent, not like trying to time the market. But in reality it's the same thing. Sixth, I remember people saying the market completely collapsed during the last economic crisis, I'm afraid it will happen again. This concept of history shaping financial anxiety is of great interest in behavioral economics research. People who lived through the gloom of the Great Depression consistently changed their saving and spending behavior for the rest of their lives. People who lived through the gloom of the 2008 financial crisis developed measurably different risk attitudes. Personal past experiences really affect investment decisions, inevitably, to a large extent. The interesting part of this is this: these experiences can be both useful and negative. People who experience real losses sometimes actually deal realistically with things that are big abstractions for people without those experiences. But excessive loss experience can also lead to excessive conservatism, which hinders wealth accumulation in the long run. Seventh, I feel like I have to check my portfolio frequently. This is connected to one of the strongest findings in research, something called myopic loss aversion. There is a direct relationship between how often you check your portfolio and how emotionally you react to market volatility. The more frequently you check, the more pronounced small fluctuations feel and the higher your chance of seeing short-term losses that cause stress. This stress really pushes people to overreact and make unnecessary changes. According to research, people who check their investments less frequently are less likely to make portfolio changes, which means less loss from unnecessary transaction costs and taxes in the long run. This is an interesting paradox: paying less attention to your portfolio is associated with better outcomes. Eighth, markets might become more predictable if I analyze them enough. This is connected to something called the illusion of control in psychology, the belief that you control more than you actually do. In a financial context, this manifests in a very specific way. When people read more market data and do more analysis, their predictions don't become more reliable, they can even become less reliable. But their confidence that they can time the market increases significantly. This is not a research finding. Knowledge and confidence increase, but actual predictive ability does not. This doesn't mean that a single line of data doesn't make you a definitely better market forecaster. But the research shows that after a while the marginal returns decrease and false confidence can be dangerous. Ninth, I'm emotionally exhausted and overwhelmed by investing, maybe it's better if I stay completely away. This is really important because investment fatigue is a real thing and most financial education doesn't talk about this at all. People overwhelmed by investment knowledge often completely stop reading financial content and participating in their portfolios. In many cases, this is actually a reasonable adaptation. If you're emotionally burned out from following the market and this means you're making bad reactive decisions, stepping away from that activity can really help, perhaps moving to something simple, consistent, and easy to manage, maybe a simple portfolio with broad index funds. The second is avoidance again and requires different interventions. The point is this: getting overwhelmed by content shouldn't be confused with struggling with avoidance. The first perhaps points to switching to something simple, consistent, and easy to manage. The second requires different approaches. No matter how complex it seems, every financial move can be broken down into simple steps, just opening that banking app, transferring a tiny amount aside. Breaking the process into these micro steps and making it concrete cuts through that crushing feeling like a knife. It may not completely eliminate the anxiety, but it shrinks it so much that it stops being a terrifying monster. Throughout this conversation you may have noticed a red thread: the key to everything is taking financial anxiety out of that vague fog state and turning it into a concrete object you can work on. And this process doesn't always progress linearly. Sometimes you start with practical steps and months later realize the real issue was deeper psychological dynamics, not numbers. Sometimes you start with a therapist and this process clarifies what you need to change in practical life. Both paths are extremely valid. The only goal here is to bring that hidden financial anxiety into the daylight and see exactly what you're worried about with naked eyes. Just this confrontation alone is an enormous healing. See you again next video. Thanks for watching.